We have finally done it. We have reached the top 20 hard rock and heavy metal songs of all time. And it just so happens on this episode, you will find out my number one song of all time. Stay tuned. All right, welcome, metal enthusiasts, to episode 11 of the Metal Dude Abides. We are going through the top 100 hard rock and heavy metal songs of all time, according to Rolling Stone magazine. And we have finally reached the top 20. As I was saying in the teaser, we also are going to reveal in this list my number one pick for the all-time best hard rock heavy metal song of all time. So let's not waste another second. Let's get to the list. All right, coming in at number 20, Rat with Round and Round. Rat was one of the biggest bands in what I call the hair metal movement, the big scene in the 80s that came out of California. This album and this song in particular just shot Rat out of really nowhere. I'd never really heard of them. This was, their debut album. They had a video with Milton Berle, of all things, and just like I said, came out of nowhere. And although I like Rat, and I think there was better songs in the Rat catalog, ultimately, if I'm going to go with a big hair metal band, song, album, you name it, there's really only one choice here. And I was very surprised that this band slash song slash artist album didn't make it. It was probably the biggest selling hair metal band of all time. And that, of course, is the great Guns N' Roses, with the fantastic album 1987's Appetite for Destruction, and the great iconic song Welcome to the Jungle, Baby, You're Gonna Die. Now, I know over the years Guns N' Roses has been a bit more controversial. Axl Rose has, really not done himself any favors from a publicity standpoint. But there's no turning back from the fact that this album was absolutely one of the greatest albums of all time. It is, again, one of those perfect albums where every song on this album is a genuine hit. Great song. And the fans agreed. This album, last I checked, had sold over 30 million copies. Now, again, we've talked about this before on this channel. I'm not swayed necessarily by commercial success, but it's hard to not look at 30 million and go, they must have done something right here. The song Welcome to the Jungle is an absolutely iconic song. Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier in our Ozzy tribute, where we talked about if you've been to a sporting event in the last 40 years, you've heard Welcome to the Jungle. I think the Cincinnati Bengals in particular love this song for they call their stadium the Jungle, and etc. So Rat's good. Guns N' Roses, like, even though they were a comet going across the sky, they were only really good for really this one album. I will grant you Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 were pretty good, but even those albums did not compare to Appetite for Destruction. This was it. If there was ever a band that just put it together for one fantastic album, it is Guns N' Roses. Now, the interesting part about this album is this. When they released this album, it flopped. It was going nowhere. And rumor has it that Geffen Records, the bigwig himself, had to go and beg radio stations and MTV to play Welcome to the Jungle. They finally got like a late night slot on MTV, and the thing just took off. It basically languished for an entire calendar year. And then in 1988, really on the back of Sweet Child of Mine, they just took off. So again, just goes to show that the radio stations and the MTV and everything that controlled music at that time wasn't really good at identifying very talented bands, because obviously this band had the goods and they weren't getting anywhere. Kind of an interesting story. It kind of goes back to all the horror stories we talk about in the 80s with the record companies and the radio stations and all of this. The world's so much better with the internet. But I digress. Coming in at number 20, the great Guns N' Roses. Welcome to the Jungle. All right, coming in at number 19, we get a return visit from Megadeth and the song Peace Sells, But Who's Buying? Now, if you followed the career of Megadeth, they had put out an initial album, Killing Is My Business. This was their second album. This was their sophomore attempt. And like so many heavy metal bands, Megadeth really makes the jump in their sophomore album. This is absolutely a barn burner of an album and a barn burner of a song. Again, if you've been following the channel, I love a good political commentary, a little satire. Megadeth has always been a band that kind of dabbles in that political circle, and they just scorch everybody involved in this one. Great song. I almost went with a second song of this very same album. I love Wake Up Dead. I love the riff in Wake Up Dead. They had the video producer for The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2 do their video. It's very like apocalyptic. It's very dystopian. I always loved that song as well. But at the end of the day, the tie goes to the iconic song. Everybody's heard Peace Sells, But Who's Buying? And it really is one of the finest songs Megadeth ever put out. And it comes in today at number 19. Peace Sells, But Who's Buying? Now, coming in at number 18 is one of the biggest bands in the history of hard rock or heavy metal. And this goes back to our big conversation. Is this heavy metal? Well, coming in at number 18 is Led Zeppelin with Immigrant Song. Now, there are some, Led Zeppelin themselves, who do not claim to be heavy metal. In fact, Led Zeppelin will get quite cranky with you if you suggest for 1 second that they're heavy metal. But again, Led Zeppelin's always been in the heavy metal family, if you will, the larger hard rock and heavy metal family. So if you're going to include Led Zeppelin, right, you have to include their greatest song of all time, and a song that at one time was probably considered their very best. From 1971, Led Zeppelin 4, Stairway to Heaven. Now, Immigrant Song is one of the greatest vocal performances by Robert Plant ever. I love that song, and it also belongs in the top 100. The point I was making before is if you're going to include Led Zeppelin, you probably need to have them. You either need to leave them off, right, because you consider them not heavy metal, or if you consider them in part of that hard rock heavy metal family, they probably need to be on this list a couple of times, because this is one of the founding members. This is one of the most iconic bands. I know, in town here, they devote whole hours of radio to, getting the lead out and play nonstop Led Zeppelin music. This is probably the biggest band of the 70s. And again, they border that hard rock and heavy metal list. But if you're going to put them on here, then put them on here. I made the same argument with Van Halen. I made the same argument with the Scorpions. If you consider them to be on this list, they should be on this list more than once. Immigrant Song absolutely, needs to be on this list, but nothing can touch Stairway to Heaven. Again, maybe the greatest hard rock heavy metal song of all time. Interestingly enough, this song was never released as a single. Uh, One of the reasons being is you had to buy the whole album. Kind of a slick move by Led Zeppelin from a marketing perspective. And of course, we talked about Guns N' Roses earlier, selling 30 million copies. This album has sold 37 million copies. So we're really talking about big, heavy hitters here. And let's face it, I love Stairway to Heaven. This is my favorite Led Zeppelin song by a mile. I love a song that just, as the song rolls out, it starts off so light, so soft, and then the tempo just kind of increases until you finally hit this fantastic crescendo. Robert Plant is at his best, and of course, the big crescendo has a fantastic Jimmy Page solo as well. So, at the end of the day, Led Zeppelin should be on this list more than once. But since we only have one slot, we're going to go with the all-time classic, maybe the number one heavy metal song of all time. But in this list, coming in at number 18, Stairway to Heaven. Let the heavy metal hard rock controversy continue, because it coming in at number 17 on the Rolling Stone list is AC/DC Back in Black. I'm going to give a repeat performance of what I said about Led Zeppelin. If you consider AC/DC heavy metal, which I do, now there's going to be people that split hairs because the borderline has changed a lot over the years. But back in the 80s, AC/DC was as heavy as they get. They were part of everything. Now they're considered more hard rock, but at the time they're heavy metal. Definitely, again, part of the heavy metal family. But if you're going to include AC/DC, you need to include them absolutely more than once. And so I'm going to, again, break the rules, because AC/DC has two eras of music. The Bon Scott era, which lasted approximately only 5 years, believe it or not. And of course, the Brian Johnson era, which has lasted now 43 years. But the Bon Scott era is just as prolific as far as great songs as the Brian Johnson era. So I'm going to make my producer mad and pick two songs here. We're going to do a tie because, again, you have to have the Bon Scott era represented, and you really need to have the Brian Johnson era represented as well. So, from the Bon Scott era, from 1977's Let There Be Rock, the iconic Whole Lotta Rosie. And for the Brian Johnson selection, from 1980's blockbuster Back in Black, we're going to go with Shoot to Thrill, a song that was recently featured on the great Marvel Iron Man movies. And once again, when we talk about iconic albums, throw this one on for size. As of last count, Back in Black has sold over 50 million copies. So again, Guns N' Roses, Led Zeppelin, move over. AC/DC's Back in Black is probably the largest heavy metal album of all time. I can't think of one that was going to top 50 million, but this one does. And again, I'm partial to the Bon Scott era. In those 5 short years, they put out so much good music, so many great hits. The Brian Johnson era has kind of been a much longer era, but actually, over those 43 years, they've only put out 11 albums, whereas the Bon Scott era, in those 5 short years, put out 6. So when you look at it, number of years, it looks ridiculous. But when you look at it album by album, actually not that big of a difference. Anyway, love the Bon Scott era, has to be represented. Love the Brian Johnson era, it also has to be represented. So coming in at number 17, we've got a tie between Whole Lotta Rosie and Shoot to Thrill. All right, coming in at number 16, we have another visit from the great Iron Maiden. And it's actually my favorite song of Iron Maiden's, Hallowed Be Thy Name, off the 1982 Number of the Beast album. This is an epic song about the horrors of death row and someone who was innocent facing their final day on Earth. Um, Now, we talked about this last episode. Iron Maiden, through the first few albums, were really going through some transitions. Number one, they had just sacked their lead singer, Paul Di'Anno, who was no slouch, by the way. We love Paul Di'Anno, but Bruce Dickinson really had to come in all guns blazing to replace this very popular singer. And all guns blazing he did. I would say this song, Hallowed Be Thy Name, is probably Bruce Dickinson's finest moment in the band, and really solidified him as, yeah, you've made a great choice here, plucking him from relative obscurity from another new wave of British heavy metal band by the name of Samson. Now, the other thing about this album that I really like is the fact that we have not yet switched drummers. And again, if you listened last episode real closely, I love you, Nico, but Clive Burr ranks as, to me, one of the greatest heavy metal drummers of all time. This is only for one album do we actually get this lineup, but I do believe it is the best lineup. With Clive Burr on drums, Adrian Smith has now joined the band. He's great. Of course, Dave Murray's and Steve Harris have been there from the get-go. And now you have the bombastic vocals of Bruce Dickinson. And it all comes together in this fantastic song at number 16, Hallowed Be Thy Name. All right, if you were with us last episode, you know that Slayer has been taken off the list and replaced with the fantastic band Five Finger Death Punch. And this song is, again, one of my all-time favorites. The song from the 2011 American Capitalist album, Over and Under It. Now, again, I'll make this very simple. The reason that Five Finger Death Punch is on this list is because they have the perfect combination of melody, attitude, anger. They have the right level of festivity, and I just really enjoy this. This song is about the pitfalls, if you will, of fame and fortune, and it just is the typical great hard charging song that we come to expect from Five Finger Death Punch. Got to put this one on the list. Sorry, Slayer fans. Five Finger Death Punch rules, and they come in at number 15 today with Over and Under It. All right, coming in at number 14 on the Rolling Stone all-time hard rock and heavy metal song list is Rainbow with Stargazer. Now, for people who know me, they probably saw this song on the list and went, this is going to be the one. And it absolutely is. This is my number one pick, all-time heavy metal song. Think about this. The song starts out with Cozy Powell doing a drum intro. I talk a lot about guitarists. One of our listeners we were kind of talking about how I'm more of a guitar guy. He's more of a drum guy, and we, sometimes might see music slightly different. So I need to pay a little bit more attention to the drummers out there, give them a little bit more love. And I'll start right here with Cozy Powell, one of my all-time favorite drummers in heavy metal. So you have Cozy Powell on drums. Then you put in the soaring vocals of my favorite singer of all time, Ronnie James Dio. And then you have Ritchie Blackmore. Now, we haven't talked a lot about Ritchie, but this is one of the greatest guitarists of all time, one of the masters. He puts together, the best way I can say it is like a Middle Eastern type of guitar solo that really matches the feel of the song, which takes place in like in Egypt way back during the time of the slaves and building the pyramids, etc. And then finally, if that's not enough, if Cozy Powell's not enough, if Ronnie James Dio's not enough, if Richie Blackmore's not enough, then we just throw in the Munich Philharmonic Orchestra. This is a recipe for the greatest heavy metal song of all time. Boom. Case closed. And, I want to go back a couple of episodes. We talked about Stone Sour, and they have kind of a combo song with Gone Sovereign and Absolute Zero. When you put the two together, you have two great songs. You put them together, it makes for one of the greatest songs of all time. In this case, although it's not quite as cohesive as that, there is a second song that goes with Stargazer that I like almost as much, and that's called A Light in the Black. So if you've never played Stargazer and A Light in the Black back to back, you'll be here a while. Both are longer songs. In fact, this is one of the great epics of all time. This is an 8.5 minute song. It doesn't feel like 8.5 minutes. We talked about this before when we talked a lot about progressive metal. Sometimes songs are just long for the sake of being long. But in this case, the 8.5 minutes is all used well. You never get bored. You're always waiting to see what's coming around the corner. This is one of those great epic songs. And again, if I were making a top 100 list, it would be number 1. But Rolling Stone has chosen it at number 14, Rainbow Stargazer. Now, coming in at number 13, we get a visit from the founders, Black Sabbath, and their epic song, Paranoid. Now, surprisingly enough, this is probably the most iconic Black Sabbath song of all time. And of course, you know me, I'm going to throw it out. We talked about how epic Stargazer was. Well, now I'm going with another epic heavy metal song from the Dio years, from the 1981 Mob Rules album, The Sign of the Southern Cross. This epic checks in at just under 8 minutes, and it is a suffocatingly heavy, slow monster of a song. I'm not sure I completely appreciated this song in my youth, but as I've grown older and I don't need everything to be going, 120 miles per hour speed metal style, this song has just slowly but surely won me over as, again, I'll put it right here, top 13 songs of all time. This is when you look at the powers of Tony Iommi, the powers of Geezer Butler. Now, in Mob Rules, Bill Ward is out of the band at this point. This is the first time we've really run into the Black Sabbath lineup with Vinny Appice. But Vinny is a great drummer, and he kind of fits this style of music, maybe even better than Bill Ward. And of course, you've got the legendary Ronnie James Dio. If you've never given the Dio version of Sabbath a chance, this is a good song to start. Coming in at number 13, Black Sabbath, Sign of the Southern Cross. Now coming in at 13 on the Rolling Stones list is Black Sabbath, Paranoid. This is an iconic song. This is Ozzy at his best. One of the things that I like about Black Sabbath is the fact that they have a lot of songs about, social commentary. And this one really tackles mental health and the ability to be happy. However, there's another Black Sabbath song that has to be on this list that I like better than Paranoid. And it comes off the 1971 Masters of Reality album, Children of the Grave. Now, again, we just got through talking about Paranoid. We're going to talk about a few other songs that had great social commentary. Children of the Grave definitely is one of those songs, as it really puts into perspective the Cold War. If you were listening to a few of the episodes a while back, we talked about if you know, grew up outside of the 70s and 80s and the 60s, the Cold War was this overarching sense of doom that somebody was going to push the button and we were going to go headlong into nuclear Armageddon. Never happened, hopefully never will. The walls came down, in the early 90s, and, everything kind of settled down a bit. We haven't had to live with that since then. But this song is, and many songs that we look at from the Black Sabbath era do talk about the horrors of war, the horrors of nuclear holocaust, and I think this might be Black Sabbath's greatest song ever, so it had to come on the list. Sorry, Paranoid, coming in at number 13, Children of the Grave. All right, coming in at number 12 is Living Color with Cult of Personality. Great song. If this had been maybe in a lower or a higher position on the list, I might have even kept it. Great song. But two things. It's way too high at number 12, which puts it in jeopardy. And secondly, it just reminds me too much of CM Punk. And I've kind of gotten tired of this song because CM Punk, if for those of you who aren't pro wrestling fans, sorry for the side rant here, but CM Punk just recently got fired from AEW, and so this song gets fired from my list. Maybe in a few years after, CM Punk maybe goes away and slides under a rock somewhere, maybe I'll start liking this song again. But for now, CM Punk, Living Color, you gotta go. And for those of you who may not be familiar, one of the bands in my backdrop over here is also one of my favorite bands of all time. And they put out an album in 1981, Riot, right over here, with Fire Down Under. Folks, this is the most underrated heavy metal band that you can find. I would go on record as to say this album alone has not one, not two, not three, but 4 songs that if you really take a look at them could be considered top 100 heavy metal material. This is a monster album. So you say, well, wait a minute. Metal Dude, if this album was so great, why have I never heard of it? Or why didn't it take off? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, if you'll notice on the album cover, it's got a seal. I'm not sure. You got to understand, back in the days before there was an internet, back in the days where you would just go to a record store, a lot of the albums you picked up were basically looking at things going, this looks metal or this doesn't look metal. Maybe, and listen, this album cover is beautiful compared to a couple of their other album covers that they came up with before this one. I don't know what the deal was with the seal guys, but it's probably a bad marketing idea. Iron Maiden has Eddie, Riot has a seal. You get the drift? Probably bad marketing. But the second reason, and this is almost hilarious, is they actually were in the midst of a record label change. Because when they put the demo for this and said, here's our new album, record company, the record company fired them and said, this isn't what we're looking for. This is way too heavy. Now, we talked about this in the 80s. The record companies were a menace back then because they were all trying to get hits and they were trying to dissuade bands from doing really heavy stuff at that time. Riot Fire Down Under, for its time, was quite heavy, but every bit of it was melodic and radio friendly. I can't imagine what the record label was thinking, but unfortunately, between moving record labels and Flaming Seals. This thing just never really took off. And shortly thereafter, this would be the last album, unfortunately, with Guy Speranza, their lead singer, who I can't put him as one of the top vocalists in heavy metal history because he just didn't have that much of a catalog, right? But this dude's got the pipes. I love Guy Speranza's voice. Rhett Forrester comes in for the next two albums, and he is himself a very good singer. But man, you just couldn't top the old Guy Speranza era. Also, the lead guitarist, one of the greatest guitarists of all time. Rest in peace, Mark Reel. He passed away several years ago from an illness. He kept this band together for forever, and just one of the most underrated guitar players in the history of heavy metal. And one more note, just in case you want to find this band, very interesting. Sometimes they now go by the title Riot 5 or Riot V. So when you look them up on like Spotify or whatever, sometimes you have to put the V in there in order to find them. I don't know why they did that. They were Riot way back in the day. They'll always be Riot to me. But if you're searching for this band and you're having trouble finding them, try Riot V, or I believe Riot 5 is the correct, Roman numeral. But anyway, this song, Outlaw, has to be on the top 100 list. It just has to be. Great song. And one more thing. I think this is also one of the greatest power metal albums of all time, because the four songs that really could be on this list, I chose Outlaw. It's got kind of like a old-time Western kind of theme of gambling and casinos and robbing banks and outlaws and banditos. Really good song. But then they also have the Apocalyptic Swords and Tequila. Altar of the King, again, is where maybe I'm getting the power metal vibes from. Kind of a medieval type of deal. And then just a straightforward rocker, the title track, Fire Down Under. 4 fantastic songs. I'm going with Outlaw on this one because I do think it may be the best, but you can't go wrong with any of them. This is it's a travesty that this album didn't do better. Coming in at number 12, Riot, Outlaw. All right, wrapping up the list tonight. Coming in at number 11, Metallica, One. This comes off, of course, their 1988 And Justice for All album. This was the first album featuring bassist Jason Newsted. And again, this is one of the first 5 Metallica albums are all fantastic. Now, we've been looking at some of the songs from, to me, the 2 best Metallica albums. Master of Puppets and Ride the Lightning. But make no mistake, And Justice for All, and in particular this song, really is what caused the avalanche that became Metallica. If you go back to the 80s, it's almost unbelievable at the time. Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, we're not getting any radio play. We're not getting anywhere. It was very much an underground band. And then this album came out, and again, there started to be a buzz out on the street that Metallica was finally going to produce a music video. And what a music video, what a debut. Based on the movie Johnny Got His Gun, they put together one of the most sobering, terrifying, wonderful videos of all time. It really depicts the horrors of war. Can you imagine being injured in war, losing your limbs, losing your ability to speak, losing your ability to see? But you're still alive, and and they have enough technology and they have enough medicine to keep you alive, but that's about it. What a nightmare that would be. And this video is absolutely a nightmare, shot in really cool black and white, and really, really captures the power of Metallica. Again, Kirk Hammett has, fantastic solos throughout the catalog, but this really focuses on the entire band, and the crunchy riff and the rhythm of this song. Highly recommend it. This song could literally be, and probably should be, the number one song on the list, with a play on those words, but it comes in at number 11, still very high. And again, if you've never seen the video for this, please go check it out. Coming in at number 11, Metallica, 1. Now, if you please remember, next week, we only have 10 songs left, but next week we're going to do a special episode where we talk about the honorable mentions, the bands and the songs that almost made the list but didn't quite make the list. Also, if you remember from last week's video, go through the videos, 100, the first 90 that we've reviewed, take a listen, and give me a thumbs up if you think my list is better than Rolling Stones. But if you think the Rolling Stones list is better, put down the songs in there that you like. Or if you think both myself and the Rolling Stones have missed something, go ahead, go into the comments and put the songs that you would put into your top 100 that we've missed. And then as part of our special next week, as we're doing all of the honorable mentions, we'll also do a little bit of a people's choice so that your voice can be heard. I'm very interested to see what songs you think we've left off. And that'll be next Tuesday, as always, 6 p.m. Mountain. Join us then. And then the following week, we're going to get the final 10. Whew! As Europe would say, the final countdown. 2 back-to-back great episodes, honorable mentions, people's choice, and then the top 10 of all time. Can't wait. In the meantime, this is the Metal Dude signing off. As always, take care.